right, what's up everybody? Today is Monday, July 28, 2025. It's Luther Wilson III here representing for Upside Property Services and Upside Capital here in the Kansas City market as a real estate pro. As some of you know, if you've been tracking, I appreciate you tuning in. In today's session, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things in real estate, seller financing. All right, so I'm going to take it a little bit deeper and talk about some of the fundamentals and some of the concepts and the ideas around seller financing for those real estate agents or real estate practitioners of sorts or real estate investors. All right, so if you own a property now, or if you're planning to own property in the future, whether it's 1 or 5 or 10 or 50 or more, right? If you like the idea of owning property and receiving a large amount of capital up front, and you get to keep the property and enjoy hopefully positive cash flow for years on end, then you'll definitely want to tune into this channel. You'll definitely want to watch this video to the end as I break down some of the ideas around seller financing again. And so something I talk about, check out some of the previous videos that I've done on my YouTube channel. Okay, so when it comes to seller financing, just a quick recap, the whole idea is to either buy or sell the property on a note, okay, which is essentially a private mortgage in a way, or to be able to buy or sell a property on terms, okay? So there's different words or jargon that real estate investors and practitioners utilize. And of course, there's different types of seller finance transactions, okay? But, you know, some people refer to it as a seller carryback or carrying the note, okay? Selling on terms or buying on terms, okay? And, you know, for those that maybe aren't as familiar with it, think of it like a car note, okay? So when you get a car, there's a loan a lot of times that you get, and then there's a pink slip or something that gets held, right, until you pay the car off, okay? So you can talk about ownership all you want, right? You can talk about control all you want, but when you're doing seller financing, that's one way that you can look at it. It's similar to buying a car, except of course it's real property. In our case, we're here in the Kansas City market, mostly doing these on single family homes. Okay, so that's a key part. Where we've seen the best success with this is on single family home investments. Okay, and I say investments because I thought about it a couple weeks ago, and I've had more people reach out over the last month or two. And I think that because of the market conditions and what's going on in the economy and so forth, that we know things have shifted, all right? And I think I see it and I believe that more property owners, more everyday, you know, home buyers who bought the house maybe 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever, now that things have shifted in the market, they see that they may not necessarily be able to sell the property quite as easily as they could have maybe a year or 2 or 3 years ago. So they're starting to look at alternatives. And as they're looking at alternatives, they're talking to different people in the real estate space, whether it's an investor or an agent or a broker, okay? And they're exploring options besides just a regular on the market retail resale process. Do you get what I'm saying? So these homeowners, they're everyday homeowners a lot of the time. They see that they may not necessarily have quite as much equity, right? And they may need to do work on the property. The house has deferred maintenance in a lot of cases, and they may not be able to get away with selling it outright and walking away with as much, or they may not walk away with any money by the time they pay the closing costs and commissions, okay? So a lot of investors, see that as an opportunity, which it is. With me being a real estate broker and an investor, I look at it from both angles because I want to, do right by the seller, right? I love doing deals. I love making money, right? But it's part of who I am, how I operate. Plus I have a fiduciary responsibility as a licensee, right? To, inform these property owners about the process and what they're in for, okay? And so back to what I was saying before, 2 instances in particular over the last month where I get connected, or I potentially could get connected with one of those home sellers, right? Either they have the house on the market now and it hasn't sold, or they're exploring their options, as I mentioned before. And I insisted that they try on the open market and, adjust the price first, right? And see if they can get it done. If they can't get it done that way, then we can explore doing some type of seller finance transaction, okay? And in that case, something that I told one of my colleagues who reached out the other day, I said, look, and I didn't really think about it much, but a lot of times when an everyday home buyer who owns a property for however long, they're considering selling on a note, or they want to sell on terms, or they may even sell using the existing financing, okay? However, whatever kind of seller finance transaction they're considering, I told my colleague, hey, a lot of times their best bet may be to sell that property to an investor if they are insistent on doing seller financing, or maybe they're in a bind, or maybe they don't, the other options aren't as attractive to them. And the reason I told my colleague this, and the reason that I'm telling y'all this now, is because, again, the market's different now. You're going to see more of these opportunities as things continue to get worse, because I think that's where we're headed, okay? So for an everyday home buyer, if they're entertaining seller financing, their best bet very well may be to sell to an investor. Why? Why is that? Because that everyday home buyer who's owned that property and they've lived in it for an extended period of time, right? A lot of times they don't necessarily want to be an investor or an accidental landlord, okay? I don't know if y'all have heard that. I haven't heard that term in a while. There was a term years ago that we as real estate practitioners used more often, and it was accidental landlord, because for whatever was going on in the economy with the market years ago, there were a lot of everyday home buyers who, right, couldn't necessarily sell their property for what they wanted. So they just ended up renting the house out, right? Or in some cases, it's an investor that was flipping houses, right? And they had success with it until the market changed, or until they ran out of money or whatever happened. And then they maybe refinanced if they had a hard money loan or a short-term debt on it, and they became accidental landlords, okay? So I think we may be getting to that point in third quarter 2025. I don't know for sure. We've got to play it by ear, but there may end up being more accidental landlords, or landlords that, didn't intend on being landlords, okay? So when I say all this for a reason, because these home buyers, right, these homeowners rather, if they are gonna sell on a note, they don't necessarily, or seller financing of some sort, their best bet may be to sell to an investor, because they may not know how to run a real estate investing business. And the fact of the matter is, when you're investing in real estate, you're not just putting capital up via real estate. You are in business now, okay? You're gonna want some type of entity. Most of the time it's an LLC, right? You're in business. You're running a real estate investing business at that point. And most homeowners, let alone most investors, have no business doing that, okay? I hate to say it, but it is what it is. It's the reality of it. And so now on the flip side, I kind of alluded to it earlier with the investors, okay? Now, if you're gonna buy creatively, okay, from a homeowner, okay, make sure you dot your I's, make sure you cross your T's, get advising, get consulting, that sort of thing. Of course, you could reach out to me and my team. We're here in the Kansas City market. I've been at it for years doing this. You know, my family, my team, my associates been at it doing it for decades, right? And so we can kind of help advise you on how to go through that process, right? But if you're an investor and you're gonna buy from a home buyer, make sure your documents are straight. Make sure you're dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and so forth. Now, then, once you have acquired that property, maybe you bought it on terms, maybe you used a traditional, financing, maybe you used hard money or whatever. If you're going to explore using seller financing as an exit strategy, okay? However you've acquired the property, and you want to do seller financing as an exit strategy, okay? In our case, from what we've seen, where we've seen the most long-term stable success is selling to owner occupants, okay? And I know it may be considered a double standard, which in our world that's life is full of, right? And it may seem a little counterintuitive for some of y'all out there, but for those investors, if you're wanting to sell on a note or wanting to sell with the use of some type of seller financing, you may very well want to consider selling to an owner occupant. Why on that front? Because owner occupants, if they're in the home, right, and it is their home, right, however you have it set up, it's different than you just renting the house out, right? And so, of course, I could go on and on about either of those, but I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper and think more so about what's happening real time in our economy in the US for real estate practitioners, for those who are serious about buying or selling with the use of some type of seller financing. Again, whether it's a existing financing, a lease option, some type of wrap, or some type of true seller carryback, contract for deed, whatever. There's some amazing opportunities to be able to do that, okay, where we've been able to see and make the biggest impact as investors, okay. We have our business set up, it's an LLC, and that's why, a lot of everyday homeowners aren't gonna necessarily want to hack it or can hack it. They don't necessarily know how to do it all properly. And then even when you are selling using seller financing, there's still some management involved. Call it what you want, asset management, managing the note, however it's structured. You got to manage the business, whether it's an LLC or something else. You still have to manage the property, right? Even after it gets occupied in some cases, right? You have to manage your mortgage, because more often than not, you have a mortgage in place on the property, and then you still have to manage the residents, making sure that they stay on point and are taking care of the property and are making the payment to you, okay, if you're gonna use seller financing as an exit strategy. And so that's a little bit more on why, it may not make sense for everyday homeowners to do it. And then if you're going to use seller financing as an investor, right, getting, again, a large amount of money up front or down payment and enjoying cash flow, ideally, hopefully, in a lot of cases for years to come, okay? So I've been able to help numerous investors in a relatively short amount of time, especially over the last 3, 4, 5 years, get 5 figures, okay? So in some cases, a couple investors that I've helped, I've been able to help them get 6 figures worth of revenue, plus they get to be able to keep the properties and enjoy cash flow, okay? That is indeed a lot more passive than what they were doing, what most of us do as, house renovators, as rental owners and landlords, okay? So that's another plug, or another, some benefits for those investors who want to do seller financing, right? And if you happen to see this and you are an everyday homeowner and you want to be in business and you want to maybe grow a portfolio, definitely hit us up, reach out to us. And before I go, A key part of this, however it's done, is the underlying debt. All right, so on most of these properties, most of these investments, everyday homeowners have mortgages. Lots of investors use mortgages. We got to dig in a little bit deeper, and as we're growing our portfolios, we have to be mindful about how we're managing these loans. Sometimes we have to borrow additional capital. There's second lien position debt. We bring in investor capitals in the whole bit. That's what we do. All right, so that's it for today. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you tuning in. It's Luther Wilson III once again. Upside Property Services, Kansas City Real Estate, all day, signing off. Have a blessed one. All right.